Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. So, welcome back. It's been a while, right? We've been doing, it's been, I think, almost a month since we've had a class. Today, I want to talk about, unfortunately, during the period of time where we were off, there was some forms that came out and changes that were made to forms, new forms that came out. So we weren't able to talk about it. So I'm getting to it now. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over some of the forms that have changed, the changes in those forms. There was a lot, but I'm only really going to cover right now the ones that you guys are using on a regular basis, and how those will affect you. Okay. So just quickly before I share my screen, anything that anybody needs to bring up or questions? All right. Well, then let's get right to it. Let's jump in. So what you guys should be looking at right now is the very top of the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. And there was just a couple changes on there that I wanted to talk about. So as I scroll down just a bit, first change is right there. They put it in bigger and bolder letters. This is something that we talked about basically in the last class that we talked about, the buyer representation agreement. Not to exceed 3 months unless buyer is a corporation, LLC, or partnership as required under Civil Code 1670.50. If representation period exceeds 3 months and buyer is not an entity, this agreement is void. So they wrote it in there that if you put anything that exceeds the 3 month period, it's a void BRBC. And the thing is that as I go through and double check files and look at things with agents, the stuff that's been received from agents from the outside, I see that these BRBCs are still not being done properly. Since I did the last class, I've seen a couple BRBCs that have exceeded the 3 month period. You guys just have to make sure you're taking this seriously. And now it's telling the buyer right there that it cannot exceed 3 months. Okay. So please make sure you're not doing that on your BRBCs. The second change is right down here. So the paragraph 4G3 was there already, but what they did add was at the end of this, buyer is advised not to include in a purchase offer a request that seller pay an amount higher than the amount in paragraph 2E1, which was the compensation on the first page, or as amended prior to buyer making an offer. So all those offers, like if we have something where our BRBC is less than what the listing agent is offering, we have to amend our BRBC prior to the offer. Okay, so the amending a buyer, like, so let's say let's 2 examples. I have a BRBC with my buyer that is at 2.5%. And then we write an offer and the listing agent and seller say only 2%. I can amend then to reduce my compensation after the fact without that being a problem. If I write an offer at 2.5 and the seller says, no, we're going to pay you 3, I have to pay 2 and I have to take 2.5 because I didn't amend my BRBC prior to writing the offer. Okay. So that's in here. It's telling the buyers, hey, by the way, now I know your buyers probably aren't reading this, not the majority of them. Some of them are going to read it. It is something that you guys should be discussing with them, though, because if they find out that it was in there and it was written that way, written improperly, the offer was submitted improperly, it could cost you guys commissions. So I know that I know it sounds like, I'm being very hard on that idea that you guys are going to lose money, but it's true that at some point that could happen. And I don't want it to happen to anybody that's watching this video or is on the Zoom call right now. In the chat, do we need to send BRBC along with offers or can it be sent to escrow? You are no longer required to send your BRBC with your offers unless there's a counteroffer that requires you to do so coming from the seller. Right now, the way that the RPA stands, it says that the buyer is asking for this compensation to be paid, excuse me, from the seller to the buyer's broker. And the buyer is basically, I am testifying to you. I'm stating that you have to take my word. I have an agreement with the buyer's agent for this amount of compensation. That's what the offer says now. So the offer doesn't require it any longer, not like it did at the very beginning of the changes when we had the SPBB and it said that there had to be a BRBC. You had to show proof of that BRBC. That doesn't exist at the moment. Doesn't mean that won't change. That's why my advice to all listing agents is request a copy of the BRBC with the counteroffer so that you can see that their compensation is the same compensation that you're agreeing to pay. And then as far as giving it to escrow, yeah, you would give that to escrow, the BRBC. Okay, questions on the changes to the BRBC? That was very quick. Any questions? No? Okay. So then let's go down to, this is an addendum. They have changed the addendum, and I really enjoy this change. Oh, so we have a question here. Okay. Let's see. Do we need to send BRBC? Okay, no, that was Melissa. We already saw that one. Can we still request the BRBC to be sent together with the offer? Yeah, you could. I imagine you could put that as your private remarks that they'd have to submit it, or you counter it and get it. But regardless, yes, you can request. Okay, so addendums. My pet peeve with addendums, and you guys all know, is that agents use it for the wrong thing. They use it for negotiating. They use it for requesting items from the seller, and that's not the proper thing to use it for. And now they have remedied that in the addendum. They added this verbiage at the top of the addendum. It says form use notes. This form is intended to be used in a buyer, seller, or tenant housing provider transactions. For all other situations requiring an addendum, use an addendum generic. And I'm going to show you what that is. That's a new form they added. A change or addition to a previously provided seller property questionnaire, real estate transfer disclosure statement, or other disclosure may be made on an amendment to prior disclosure. Another new form. I'm going to show you that. So they made a form specific for if I have to amend a disclosure, there's a form for that. To change terms of already executed agreement, use the amendment to existing agreement, which has been the thing I've been trying to preach to you guys for a while. So addendums are for space, and that is it. I don't have enough room in my purchase agreement for the information that I want to convey with my purchase agreement. I don't have enough room in my request for repairs. I don't have enough room in my Avid. That's what addendums are for. Okay. If I'm going to ask you for a credit, a price reduction, anything else that's going to change the term of the purchase agreement that we agreed to, then I'm going to use the amendment of existing agreement terms. That's it. This addendum is, again, only for room. Now, there is this form, the addendum generic. So there are times when there has to be some kind of an agreement, maybe between buyer and broker, seller and broker, that has nothing to do with buyer and seller, buyer and or seller. And that's what addendum generic is for. So if you look here, it's the buyer and or tenant, seller and or housing provider, landlord, are the ones who sign that addendum because it's part of a transaction. This addendum generic, if you look at this as a brand new form, it just has principle 1, principle 2. And up here, those principles, principle 1 can be broker, agent, buyer, or tenant. And principle 2 can be broker, agent, seller, housing provider, or other. So you can do, if you have to have something in writing signed by somebody that has nothing to do specifically with the transaction, you have that here. Or if it's between the broker, buyer's agent, and and buyer or seller and listing agent, you could do that there. This, if the principals intend to modify the compensation previously agreed in the listing or buyer representation agreement, use a modification of terms, right? There's a specific form for our buyer rep and for our listing agreement, right? So if we're changing something in the listing agreement, we use the MTLA. If we're changing something in the buyer representation agreement, we're doing that in the modification of terms, the MTBR. Like what? Okay. I mean, there's millions of examples, but many times you guys are having conversations with your buyers and or sellers, and you're giving them advice to do something that's in their best interest and they're choosing not to. This could be something where you could have them sign that. Okay. So this is just, again, keep in mind, this is just for any kind of an agreement or something that you need to be signed outside of the scope of the transaction. Okay. Kyle, is the listing agent, if my seller at the beginning when we signed the contract wanted the property to be contingent, and now that it's listed, he doesn't want it contingent, but I clicked on the box where it says contingent on the listing unit. Do I need to okay, so yeah, you could do a modification of terms to the listing agreement and state that it's no longer contingent, just so that there's no loophole for the seller to say, oh, my listing agreement was based on me finding a replacement property and I did not do that. So yes, of course. So yes, that would be a modification of terms for the listing agreement. But yeah, these generic addendums could be anything. It's whatever agreement you have. Like, for example, you agree with the buyer that you're going to credit outside of you're going to give them a credit from your commission. You could write that up, so you could send that maybe to the escrow. This has nothing to do with the seller, so that would be that agreement. Let's see. How about an agreement for other services being provided to a seller? What other services are you talking about? Because you shouldn't be providing any other services. No, you can't. You shouldn't be loaning any money. And I'm not going to say put that on an addendum. You guys shouldn't be loaning any money. Sorry. So I'm not going to condone that. You should not be performing any services for a seller or a buyer that are outside the scope of what your job is in this transaction. That's it. Can you say the name of the form again? I don't know which form you're referring to. So I can't say the name of the form because I don't know which one you're talking about. We've talked about the BRBC. We've talked about the modification of terms for the listing agreement, modification of terms for the buyer representation agreement, the addendum generic, and the addendum. Addendum generic, I would suppose you could use for that, because sometimes escrows want something in writing that's an agreement. So most of the time when it's a credit like that from the buyer's agent to the buyer for their credit, you could just send in you could usually just tell the escrow that you want to do that. But if escrows are requesting something, this would be the form that I would use to do that. Okay. Let's try to keep moving on here. The other form that was mentioned in the original addendum is the amendment to prior disclosure. This is a new form. This form is, again, specifically for a disclosure that needs to be amended. So if there is a change to your TDS, if there's something that you failed to disclose or you omitted by accident, this is where it would go. So you can see here, this form is amendment or addition to a previously provided either seller property questionnaire, transfer disclosure, or whatever other disclosure there might be, lead-based paint maybe, I don't know. And what the date of it is on the property known as the property address, the buyer, the seller's names, pretty straightforward. This property is a duplex, triplex, or fourplex. This APD is for all the units. So like you guys know that the SPQ and the TDS and the AVID can legally, one form can cover all up to 4 units. That's not my suggestion if you're trying to do a thorough disclosure, but it can be. So you could check the box for this the same way, or if it's an amendment for only 1 unit. So let's say that all 4 units, right, you did the disclosure for all 4 units, but only 1 unit has the amendment, then you could check the box here and do that. Or if you did individual amendments for each one. Okay. Disclosure limitation. The following are representations made by the seller and are not the representations of agents, if any. This disclosure statement is not a warranty of any kind by the seller or any agents and is not a substitute for any inspections or warranties the principals may wish to obtain. This disclosure is not intended to be part of the contract between buyer and seller unless otherwise specified in writing. Broker and any real estate licensee or other person working with or through broker have not verified information provided by seller. A real estate broker is qualified to advise on real estate transactions. If seller or buyer desire legal advice, they should consult a qualified California real estate attorney. Okay. Seller makes the following disclosures. If applicable, this disclosure applies to paragraphs of the above designated form. So it would be in your best interest to check the box here and put what paragraph your amended or new disclosure is related to on the above disclosure, whether that be the SPQ or the TDS. And then you write out what that disclosure is, that new one is, and that's it. Now, this verbiage that's right here is similar to the verbiage that's in the TDS and the SPQ. After you write in whatever it is that you're adding to disclose, the seller represents that disclosures made on this form and any attached addenda is true and correct to the best of seller's knowledge as of the date signed by seller. Seller acknowledges that seller's obligation to disclose is independent from any duty of disclosure that a real estate licensee may have in this transaction. Nothing that any such real estate licensee does or says to buyer or seller relieves seller from his or her own duty of disclosure. And an amendment to a seller property questionnaire or real estate transfer disclosure may give a buyer a statutory or contractual right to rescind or cancel the contract. And that is true. If I've already delivered the SPQ, let's just say, instead of naming them, I've already delivered the mandated disclosures, right? The disclosures that are required by the state of California. I gave all of those. And then something new pops up. Either something new happens or something that I forgot to mention I need to disclose. So when we first deliver these documents, these disclosures to a buyer, they have a 5-day right of rescission, which means that no matter what, they could have no contingencies at all. But 5 days, within 5 days of their receipt of these disclosures from us, they can just say, I choose to cancel. I want to rescind my contract. I'm out. And there's nothing we could do about it. So if my disclosures are not thorough and they're not complete when I deliver them to the buyer, and let's say 10 days later, right? So now let's say we're 17 days in, the buyers maybe have already removed their inspection contingency and others. I then have to send this amendment because it was something I forgot to disclose. That buyer then gets a new 5-day right of rescission because it's like basically giving them a new TDS. Now, that's why you have to make sure your disclosures are thorough and you don't miss anything and you fill everything out properly and you do all things the right way. Now, if something new happens, if there's a storm and we find out that the roof was leaking and we didn't know it, or there's some kind of water intrusion or a pipe bursts, or the electrical panel goes out or something like that, and we have to disclose it because it's something new that just happened, that's different. That's beyond your control, but you would still give the buyer that 5-day right of rescission for those mandated disclosures. So you have to keep that in mind. So as you do this, when you do this, you've got to make sure that your seller is aware that, by the way, now that we're changing the disclosure, we are giving the buyer a window to be able to cancel this agreement so that they're not surprised if it happens. Now, most of the time, it's not going to happen. Most buyers get this far and they're getting disclosures and, the stuff is not major. They're not going anywhere. Now, if this is a major disclosure, if you find out that the entire foundation is, wrecked, then yeah, you're probably going to lose your buyer. But you still have to make sure that your seller is aware that just by amending a disclosure, we may be giving our buyers the right to walk away from the transaction. For single family residents with a permitted ADU, do I only need one disclosure or do I need separate disclosures? Okay, so if there are 2 units, which you basically consider an ADU 2 units. So there's 2, 3, or 4 units. You have 2 choices. You can do all of the disclosures on one, right? You can do one TDS, one SPQ, as long as you feel like you're covering all of the information that needs to be disclosed, or you could do one for each. That's your choice and your seller's choice based on whether or not you can cover all of the information on one. Okay. All right. So, any questions about the amendment to prior disclosure before we move on? No? Okay. So, keep in mind if you're changing your disclosures, this form exists now. You have to use it. You can't do it any other way. It has to be done like this. Okay. So, once a form exists for a specific task, that's the task you use it for. You don't use another thing. So, don't use an addendum, especially now that the addendum tells you right here, don't use it. You have a form for that. And I like that. That was one of my favorite changes that I saw, that the addendum that you guys love, you are enamored with addendums. It's such a hard habit for you guys to break, to use the proper forms. But everybody loves these addendums. Now, at least on the addendum, it says, don't use it for this. Don't use it for this. This is what it's for. So I like that. Okay, so no questions about amendment to a prior disclosure. Terrific. Let's move on. So again, for any disclosure, whether it be Avid, SPQ, TDS, lead-based payment, whatever, if you can cover it on one, that's legal. My advice is you should do separate, but you can do one if you have 2 units. Okay. Okay. The additional signature addendum is not a new form, but it is completely different. And they made some changes that really make a lot of sense. Okay. So I know that, there have been times when, people want to do one additional signature addendum and it's for multiple forms and things like that. And most of the time that's not okay. But what they've done now with this additional signature addendum is they've made it so if I'm using it with a certain set of forms, like the purchase agreement. So if I say this is an additional signature addendum to the purchase agreement, then that means that I'm signing the disclosure regarding agents and relationships, the PRBS, the possible representation of more than one buyer and seller, the buyer's investigation advisory, the fair housing and discriminatory advisory, the buyer's homeowners insurance advisory, the wire fraud and electric funds advisory, the Consumer Privacy Act advisory, disclosure and notice. It also says liquidated damages. There is a new form for the additional signers to sign, to initial that they're accepting liquidated damages and dispute resolution, the arbitration section. I'm going to show you that in a second. So now I have the space for 4 additional buyers or sellers to sign. I would put all of the additional signers up here. Okay. So if I'm the buyer, I'm going to put here and I'm going to write the names of the 4 additional buyers in here. Okay. If I'm, if there's 1 buyer and there's 4 sellers, then I'm going to write the additional 4 sellers here. Okay. So if it's a purchase, I'm going to check this box. And now the buyer, by signing this one form, signed all of those forms that are in that box. If this is a listing agreement, then I check the listing agreement. And now all 3, 4, 6 sellers have signed the listing agreement, the disclosure regarding agency relationships, the multiple listing service addendum, the broker compensation advisory, the PRBS, the consumer privacy, the fair housing. They signed all of those. Okay, so now it's stating that they signed them. In the past, it was kind of just like they signed the additional signature addendum, so that was part of the listing agreement, that whole package. But now they're referencing exactly what they are. And the same thing with the buyer's representation agreement. If I have multiple buyers, then on the BRBC, they can sign here, and here's all the forms that they signed. This thing works for the rentals. And now they even have on here for disclosure, the transfer disclosure and the SPQ. And if you want, you can add other forms in here. Now, it can't be, okay, so this one is for the transfer disclosure, all these other forms I put in, and the listing. I would suggest that we still keep it to, hey, I did one for the listing agreement, right? And now I'm going to do one for the transfer disclosure and the SPQ. And if there's any additional forms, I'm going to do one from that. So instead of having additional signature addendums for all forms, I'm not saying that it's wouldn't be acceptable if you just checked off that it was the listing, the rent, the disclosure and all that stuff. I just think that we need to make an effort to at least acknowledge that seller is acknowledging that, yeah, there was multiple forms, not just I'm going to sign one time for, really 15 different forms. That doesn't work. Okay. Okay, Lulu, can we save that question for the BRBC till the end? Because it's really not what we're talking about at the moment. So I'll get back to you at the end if I can. If I forget, just put it in the chat and I'll remind it. When we're done, we'll go back to the BRBC. So I like the change to the additional signature addendum because it made it a little bit clearer. Okay, so now by signing below, the undersigned acknowledges a receipt of the documents identified above, and if applicable, the liquidated damage and arbitration additional signature addendum attached. We're going to show you that right now, and agrees to the terms, conditions, representations, and disclosures in the document. Note, only the new signatories need to sign below. For example, if X, Y, and Z are all buyers and X and Y previously signed the documents, only Z needs to sign below. So remember that if two people signed, only one person needs to sign if there's three. If there's four, then two people will sign here, two people will sign all the other documents. Okay, so keep that in mind. I saw Bertha's hand go up and then it went back down. So go ahead, Bertha.
Just answer the question. Thank you.
Okay. So that's the new additional signature addendum. Now, keep in mind, all these forms are already in. They're already in zip forms. They've already been updated. I would suggest for those of you that are still using templates that you go in and update all your templates, because templates don't update automatically. Only the individual forms do. So if you open a template, you may still get the outdated forms and you won't be compliant. So please make sure you're doing those updates. Sometimes agents want us to have the additional buyer sign near the other signers on the document itself instead of an ASA. What do we do then? If it's the listing agent that's requiring you to do that, then do it. If it's the buyer's agent, tell them to pound sand. I get it from a listing perspective. Like a listing agent who doesn't understand is going to give you guys orders, and there's not much you can do because then they're going to make your life hell. But if you're a listing agent and you're doing the right thing and a buyer's agent is trying to get you to do things the wrong way, tell them to beat it. Educate them. Tell them that this is the right way things need to be done. If they don't like it, then they can cancel and move on to another seller. I mean, you guys got to start standing your ground a little bit. I know that everybody's head is believing that somehow this is a buyer's market somehow. I don't know what kind of hypnosis you guys are all under to believe that, but you are. So you guys are tiptoeing around making buyers do things the right way. You got to knock that off. So yeah, if a listing agent asks you to do it, I get it. If a buyer's agent is having an issue with it, too bad. Still make them do it. Okay. I thought I saw a hand, but I guess I didn't. Okay. So next up is the liquidated damages and arbitration. How is it not a buyer's market? Well, this isn't about statistics, but if you follow this market at all, anywhere, there is less than 6 months of inventory, and everywhere we do business, it won't dictate a buyer's market until somehow we exceed 6 months of inventory. The prices are up year over year. There's no price reductions other than in one city that I do stats for. There is a 1% price decrease from last year. Okay, so it is not a buyer's market. I don't know who's telling you it's a buyer's market. Stop listening to the national news about it, because other markets, yeah, are problems. State of Florida, sure, it's a buyer's market. Maybe Northern California, it's a buyer's market. San Diego, it's getting to be a buyer's market. But where we do business, it is not. Okay, liquidated damage and arbitration. This is for people who have to sign the additional signature addendum. So basically what we did is that paragraph from the RPA that your buyers would initial and sign, right? Off the top of my head, though, it's paragraph like 29 and 30 or something like that. They've just recreated it now in its own form. So you have the buyers and the seller's name there. And then you see right here on liquidated damages, additional signer 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on how many you have, they will initial it there. Right? They'll initial because they're initialing that they're agreeing to the liquidated damages clause. That's right here, paragraph 2. Then arbitration of disputes, which is where we would go mediation, and then instead of litigation, we would go to arbitration. They would initial inside here 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then they're going to acknowledge down here that they got that they received a copy of this. They're going to initial again. So there's no signatures on this page. It's all initials. But this is just for those additional signers on the RPA for them to agree to the liquidated damages clause and the dispute resolution clause. Okay? Pretty straightforward. I like that they did that separate because I think what happened is a lot of people got confused on the old additional signature addendum where they had 2 places to initial and it says I agree or do not agree, right? So I think it was confusing. This is a lot clearer. I know it's actually having to add an extra document. Sometimes, it throws us for a loop and we don't want to have to do that work, but this is better. It's cleaner, it's clearer. We know that everybody's agreed. Okay. Next up, the FHA VA amendatory clause. They added to the FHA VA amendatory clause this little checkbox. And this is for if there is a change to the price that is a change to a previously executed amendatory clause. So when I wrote my offer for the FHA VA amendatory clause, right? Let's say my offer price was $700,000. Then I would put 700,000 here. Okay, so this is my original. So we got this $700,000 purchase price. We send that in. The appraisal doesn't come in, or we get another price. Like, for example, if I write my offer at 700, then I get a counter offer that says now it's got to be 725. I've got to amend this amendatory clause. So if that were the case, I would have this one that was sent in at 700 that was already signed by the buyer that's in our file, and you have to keep. You can't just throw it away. So now when the counter offer comes back and it says now it's going to be 725, well, then we're going to check this box and we're going to send a new one that says 725. And that 725, not $725, 725. Now it says, due to a modification of price stated in a previous amendatory clause, this FHAV amendatory clause reflects the current purchase price and supersedes any previous amendatory clauses. Okay. So I like that they put that verbiage in. So it then again, it prompts us to make sure that we're amending our FVACs based on the changes to prices. Because you could have a price change for many reasons. A price decrease because of repairs, a price increase because of, credits requested, all kinds of things. So you got to make sure that it changes because that FVAC does have to match the actual purchase price. Okay. All right. Here's the modification of terms listing agreement that we had talked about. What I highlighted on here that the change they made, if the listing agreement is an exclusive agreement regarding residential property improved with 1 to 4 units, this renewal may not last longer than 12 months from the date of this modification. This restriction does not apply if principal is a corporation, LLC, or partnership. If the renewal exceeds 12 months on a residential 1 through 4, this modification is void unless principal is a corporation, LLC, or partnership. It is unlawful to record or file the listing agreement or memorandum or notice thereof with the county recorder. So what they're saying is so the listing agreement now has a maximum date of 24 months. Right? My listing agreement cannot exceed 24 months if it is an individual. If it's a corporation or LLC, it can, but if it is an individual, it cannot. So now, if I modify this agreement to increase the amount of time that's on there, right? So if I get I'm at the 24-month and we don't want it to expire, they want to keep working with me, I can modify to extend the expiration date. It cannot exceed an additional 12 months. Okay. So you got to keep that in mind, that there is a limit on how long I can have a listing. Now, if it's an LLC corporation, it's one of your investors or whatever, that listing there's no cap on that listing, not like there is with an individual. So what they're trying to do is just protect the individual consumer, not those investors and businesses that are buying and selling properties. Okay. So just keep in mind, if I'm changing the expiration date of my offer, it cannot exceed 12 months of that date. A trust is still an individual. It is not an LLC or a corporation or a partnership. Okay. It's just business entities, corporations, LLCs, partnerships. Can the change to the FHA VA amendatory clause? It's just that they added this little box up here that allows everyone to know that this is a modified FVAC, not the original, and it supersedes any other FVACs that may have been part of the transaction. Okay. So that's the modification of terms of listing agreement. That's all that's changed on it. But since we talked about it earlier, this is where I'm going to change anything that has to do with my listing agreement. Okay. So if we're changing the price, that's where the price is going to go. If we're changing the expiration date, that's where that's going to go. If we're changing the compensation, that's where this is going to go. Any other terms that we're going to change, we're going to write in here. So for, that example earlier, it's like, it's not contingent on them buying a replacement property now. Well, then I would put, listing is no longer contingent on seller finding a replacement property. That's it. Anything that's on this, that's like a listing has the same thing, is there's management approval within 5 days of your listing. So like not just this modification, but your listing period. If you turn in a listing to us and there's terms on there that we don't agree with, within 5 days of the execution date, we can basically void that listing. Okay. So the same thing with the modification of terms. If there's something as far as broker management, the brokerage itself doesn't agree with terms that you've done, that we can cancel that modification. We can cancel the listing agreement. So keep that in mind, that if you're doing something that maybe you think you should get our permission to do, get our permission to do it beforehand. Because if we give you permission, then obviously we're not going to cancel it. But there's been many times where, what sort of things come to mind for that? Rebates back to sellers, enormous credits, very low commissions or no commissions, things like that. Okay. So if you don't change anything, if it's not written here, everything that was signed in that original listing agreement remains in effect. Okay. There's another new form, confidentiality and non-disclosure agreement. Okay. So in the past, we've talked about that offers are not necessarily confidential, right? If I submit an offer, the listing agent has the right to share the terms of my offer, whether it be price or any other terms, with any other potential buyers, right? There's nothing confidential about my offer. Same thing basically for the seller, is like the seller, there's nothing confidential technically with the seller. I mean, I can't share like, oh, they're selling their house because they're getting divorced. Like, I'm not supposed to do that. Right. And I know I see that on the MLS, like, oh, this is a divorce sale. And I think what agents are trying to do is they're trying to let people know, like, hey, it's going to take us a while to get things signed. But also what that does is that you have to think about what that makes buyers and buyers agents think. Oh, it's a divorce sale, meaning they have to sell, meaning they're probably more desperate than a regular seller. And that's a lot of the times is not the case. So we just going to make sure that we're not sharing something that could harm the seller as far as the marketability of the property or anything like that. But offers are not confidential. I can share them with whoever I want. Now, this confidentiality agreement would change that if everybody signed it. Okay. So this confidentiality and non-disclosure agreement is given in connection with or in contemplation of the purchase agreement. Okay. So let's just say, for example, I have a buyer that doesn't want anybody to know who they are, what they're offering, how much money, how much credits, all that. They don't want anybody to know that. They want it to be conventional or confidential. So if that were the case, we fill in everything, address, the whole thing, the date of the purchase agreement. We check off this buyer that the buyer is delivering this proposed agreement to the seller. Okay, this is a proposed agreement. We'll be delivering the proposed agreement to the other party, provided that the other party and its agents agree to keep the information described in paragraph 2 confidential and not to disclose it prior to or during the pendency of any transaction that may result from the proposed agreement, except as specified in paragraph 3, or if this box is checked ever, even afterwards. Okay. Both parties agree that by signing this confidentiality agreement and by providing or receiving the information below, neither party shall be required to execute nor be bound by the proposed agreement. Okay. Each party agrees that it shall be responsible for any breach of this confidentiality agreement by its prospective agents. So what's happening, what they're trying to tell you here is that if I'm the buyer and I'm going to propose an agreement to you, I'm gonna send you an offer, but I want you, prior to me sending you an offer, I want you to sign this confidentiality agreement that says you're not going to share it with anybody, or else I'm not going to send it to you. That's basically what this is asking. It's not saying here is my offer and my confidentiality agreement. No, it is saying here is my NDA. If you agree to the NDA, then I will send you my offer. Now, there is nothing that says that a seller has to agree to the NDA. Okay, nothing at all. But that means they may not receive that offer, right? Because you haven't gotten it yet. So it's a proposed agreement. So that's how this works, basically. I mean, a seller could send it to them also saying like, hey, before you send me an offer, you have to sign this NDA because you can't tell anybody who I am. Like, this stuff is probably more for like really rich people and for celebrities, right? So what I would say is like, if I'm a celebrity and you're calling me and saying, hey, we want to submit an offer, terrific. Here's an NDA, sign that, then submit me your offer, which means you can't share any of my information with anybody. And if you do, now you're putting yourself in a position where, I could sue you for violating the NDA. I don't know how many of you guys are going to use this, but it's the reason I brought it up is because not too long ago, I can't remember who it was. An agent was asking me, he's like, hey, is there an NDA in the zip forms? And I was like, no, there's not. You'd have to like kind of do, and now there is. Okay. So what it does say here is this is the information that is confidential. The seller or housing provider's name, the buyer or tenant's name. Okay. We're not going to share that with anybody. The price of the property, the terms of the property, or anything else that you want to put in there. Right. So they're just saying, like, if I'm a seller, I would probably say, hey, you can't disclose that you wrote an offer on my house or that, you know who I am selling my house because I don't want you to. Okay. As a buyer, I don't want, if I'm somebody, I don't want people to know what my business is. You can't tell anybody my name, and you can't tell anybody what I offered for the property or the terms that we agreed upon. Seller could do the same thing, right? I don't want anybody to know. You can't share with anybody what we did, any of this. Now, the confidentiality doesn't supersede the code of ethics rules for us as agents. Right. So even though the buyer and seller have this non-disclosure term, there are certain things that are not going to be confidential because eventually they're going to have to be put in. Now, the seller's names, the buyer's names, that never goes in the MLS, but the price does and the concessions do. And those things we have to follow. Okay. I think that answered your question, Melissa. If there's any exceptions from that, then it now gets into the disputes about attorney's fees and things like that. This confidentiality agreement has significant legal consequences. Brokers are not attorneys and do not counsel as to the consequences of that confidentiality agreement. Prior to signing below, each party should seek the advice of a qualified real estate attorney as to the consequences of this confidentiality agreement. Buyer signs it, seller signs it, we sign it, right? The two different brokerages, and that's it. Now it's in there. I'm not assuming that you guys are going to use this very often, but it's just somebody had asked me. It's new form. It has effects on the the norms of what happens with the confidential offers, right? Where I can sell sales prices, share sales prices, and concessions and things like that. So that's why I wanted to bring it up. Yes, confidential from everybody. Confidential from everybody. Yes, outside of the transaction. Okay, the referral fee agreement has changed. It changed a little bit too, so it looks a little bit different. So the top part, the referring agent, the recipient, the representing agent, they changed from recipient broker to representing broker instead of recipient. And the principal's name, that's fairly the same, other than, like I said, they just changed recipient to representing. Has all of the terms of it, what you're going to pay, right? What the referral fee is going to be. What the referral period is detailed as 12 full months from the date of the agreement, or you could change that. Okay. Compensation is payable upon recordation of a deed or other evidence of transfer resulting from the event specified in this agreement, whether closing occurs during or after the expiration time. The referring broker signs and puts their tax ID number in, right? You have to put that in, the tax ID number. And the representing broker, the receiving one, we sign and the broker signs. That's it. It just changed a little bit. I want you guys to see what it looked like, because if you've done these referral agreements in the past, it may look different when you bring one up and see it. Okay, and the last one I want to bring up is not in the zip forms. I have it as, because I wanted to show you just how much had changed on it. And that is this guy right here, the PRBS. So let's look at that. This is the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. So these are the drafts before it went into your zip forms. And when they do the drafts, they do redline versions of it. So I can see where all the changes were without having to read the whole thing and guess, right? So this is the redline version of the PRBS. So as you can see, they changed quite a bit on this PRBS. You see all the stuff that's in red is all new verbiage. Okay. That's all new. I'm not going to read everything to you, but what it started to do was it just broke it down. So we've talked about the PRBS in the past, where it's like multiple buyers, multiple sellers, dual agency, the whole thing. They kind of just, for an example, we'll look at the multiple buyers. Brokerage, individually or through any of its associate licensees, may work with many prospective buyers at the same time. This is the same, the black. These prospective buyers may have an interest in and make offers on the same properties. Some of these properties may be listed with the brokerage. Whether brokerage is large or small, it is possible that one associate licensee, agent one, working with a buyer, may not be aware that another associate licensee, agent two, is working with a different buyer who is interested in viewing or making an offer on the same properties agent one's clients, and vice versa. Brokerage will not limit or restrict any buyer from making an offer on any specific property, whether or not the brokerage represents other buyers interested in the same property. So what they did is all the black stuff was already in there, the black type, and it was just that, hey, we're not going to limit our agents. They added in the examples of what that means to the buyer. So they did the same thing with multiple sellers, did the same thing with dual agency, and explained how brokerage dual agency and single agent dual agency, what the differences are between those two, right? Because we know that dual agency exists when, one agent from this brokerage and another agent from this brokerage one represents a buyer, one represents a seller, right? So you have two separate agents, but they're under the same umbrella. Or you could have dual agency where one agent represents both buyer and seller, and they break that down here in this. So I just wanted to show you the significant changes that were made to the PRBS just by adding in more verbiage, so that maybe for the consumer to feel a little bit more comfortable about what exactly they were signing. All right, so let me stop my share and let's go back. Lulu had a question. Lulu, can you raise your hand so I can find you? Oh, there you are. Go ahead, Lulu. You had a question about the BRBC.
Yeah, Kyle, I have a question regarding the ASA in relation to the BRBC. So the ASA, if I have like 4 buyers
Mm-hmm.
two buyers can sign the BRBC, the actual BRBC, and then the other buyers will sign the ASA, right? They will
Yes.
initially sign. Okay.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
same goes for the RPA, like
Same thing. Like if we're looking, I was trying to bring up my zip forms again and I lost it here. Hold on a second. I was going to try to share it with you guys again, but I don't know where it went. Where did that go? When I switched over, darn it, I lost it. I don't know how to get it back.
because I always have that confusion, being old school. We used to like pile all the buyers on the RPA and have everybody sign. And
Yeah, here we go. Look, like here's I'm going to go back to the ASA again. Where is that? Okay, so I'm going to share again. And so now with the additional signature addendum, when you put it now, like what I used to tell you guys was just put the names of the people that are signing this. Now it's fine. You could put all the buyers' names in there that you want, but I still would, for cleanliness, I would put just the buyers that are going to sign here or sellers that are going to sign here. But now you can see all of these things. If I check off purchase, these are all being signed.
right, okay.
Right. So if I'm doing like same thing down here with the buyer representation, if I check that box and have them sign this, everything is being signed. Right. So I think I think that's much better. I think it's much better for you guys. Yeah, much cleaner, and it stops people because I know that there has been listing agents in the past that are asking you guys for multiple additional signature addendums.
Right.
You get both. You get one that's like, well, you need to do an additional signature addendum for this, and they're giving you this list of things you have to do, or they're saying, I don't want the additional signature addendum. Force the signatures into the actual document. Right. Those are the two things you get as that are requests from listing agents. And so again, this I think is going to make it less likely for them to have those crazy requests because it's easier to understand.
Right. And then regarding the BRBC, okay, if I have an original BRBC, then my buyer's compensation is going to be, my buyer representing compensation is going to be 3%. And then they're only offering 2 or 2.5. Then I can amend that, right? I amend that.
Yeah, amending down you can do after the offer is accepted.
Right.
If it's amending up, you have to do that prior to even submitting the offer. So, for example, I call you and you say, hey, by the way, if you have a buyer, I'm offering 3%, but my BRBC is only at 2.5.
Right.
I can go to my buyer, and if I can explain to my buyer why I need their commitment to increase what they're going to pay me, hey, by the way, if you can increase what they're going to pay me, the seller's going to give me more. If I can do that prior to submitting the offer, no problems. If I submit the offer with that 2% BRBC, I got to stick with the 2%. It doesn't matter what the seller's offering.
Oh.
If I submit my offer with 2%, and let's say the seller's only going to pay 1.5, and my buyer has no money to pay, after the fact, I can reduce it. I just can't increase it.
Oh, okay. And increase it.
Any increases on that BRBC compensation have to happen prior to offers. Decreases can happen after.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see. On the referral agreement, there's a box for the agents to initial. That's supposed to be initialed after the broker's manager signed. Yeah, well, where is that? Let's see. Just so I make sure I give you guys the right information. Oh, that's the initial for them to say that they've received it. So yeah, it would be after everybody signed it. If you amend down the BRBC, if you amend it down in escrow, but the sale falls out of escrow, do we need to amend it up now for the next property? Yeah, as long as you can get your buyer to agree to that modification. Okay. Do you need to make a new BRBC when the seller is paying 2% and the buyer pays 1% and your original contract was at 3%? No. If your BRBC, and this is what I think is happening, if your BRBC is already at 3% and you write an offer and the seller is going to pay you 2%, then submitting the fully executed purchase agreement and your BRBC to escrow, then escrow would take 2% from the seller and 1% from your buyer. So I think that's what you're asking me. But yes, that's what would happen. You don't have to change it. You have to leave it like that. And I think that was a misconception. I heard like somebody called me this week and said was mad that the buyer's agent set in a BRBC that was 2%, and the seller was paying 2%, and they thought that the buyer's agent was getting an additional 2%, and they were angry that that was happening. Well, number one, that's not the case. I can only make as much as written on my BRBC, right? So if I have 2% of my BRBC, that's the max I can make. So if I'm getting 2% from the seller, that eliminates any, any duty of the buyer to pay me. But as buyer's agent, I can make as much money as I want. So if I ask you for 2 and you pay me 2, and I have a buyer representation agreement that says 6% on it, that buyer can pay me an additional 4%, and there's nothing wrong with that. I negotiated that. The buyer saw the value in that. That's how it works. I think earlier somebody had asked about where we get the tax ID number. Right now, it's on All Stars Connect for you guys that work here. It's on All Stars Connect underneath company info. If you are watching this video and you work somewhere else, you got to talk to your broker about what your tax ID number is. Okay. Well, I think that'll do it. Like I said, if I were you two, if you guys want to just kind of deep dive and find out what else is out there, I brought up the stuff that I thought you guys would use the most. But if you go into your zip forms and you go into the libraries, like when you're going to look up forms, there's a little drop down where it's like it says all, and you can pick which library you want to search through. If you click that down, that little drop down arrow, there's one that'll say June revisions. It'll say 625 revisions and new forms, and then it'll have a list of all of them there. Otherwise, you could go to car.org and you could go to transactions and to standard forms, and they will have that same list, like those redlined versions, and they will have a little PDF that'll tell you an explanation about what the changes were and whether or not you can use old forms or only the new forms. So I would take a look at that too if I were you. Thank you guys so much. If anybody missed any part of this, or you know somebody that should have watched it, it'll be on YouTube later today. Please, if you guys go to my YouTube, like them, share them, subscribe to it if you haven't already. I'm trying to get as many people as we can to watch it. I think the more people that get educated like you guys do, the better it'll be for all of us out there. So I thank you guys for being here. Take care of yourself. No class next week because we'll be at the Superstar Retreat, but we'll be back after that. Thank you guys. Be safe and be productive. And I'll talk to you soon.